All right, MPCA. Good day, everyone. My name is Leya Charles. I'm the Water Assessment and Impaired Waters List Coordinator for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And welcome to the second of 5 different meetings we're having on the draft Impaired Waters List for 2024. So if you have come to talk about that, you are in the right place. And you know, because Minnesota's lakes and streams are naturally diverse, we're having these regional meetings to talk about some of the assessments more deeply in those regions. And then we're also having 2 meetings statewide to talk more about those statewide assessments of PFAS, mercury, sulfate, that sort of thing. And that'll be Friday and next Tuesday. You'll hear more about that at the end of the presentation. Next slide. Thanks. So the Clean Water Act, established in 1972, requires states and tribal nations with treatment as a state to develop standards to protect designated uses. And designated uses, we'll talk more in a moment, but essentially the goals of what we want our water bodies to achieve. And then the Clean Water Act, by the federal government, requires that we do list waters that don't meet those standards. And this is not at all the only things that the Clean Water Act requires of states, but it's a piece of what they require is to develop standards and to list waters that don't meet those standards. There is a lot of things we do in Minnesota to protect and restore our water bodies. And this is just one piece of it. And fun fact, the MPCA was actually established 5 years before the Clean Water Act, which to me just really demonstrates the passion and the care that Minnesotans have in protecting our vast number of waterways. Next slide. So Minnesota's Impaired Waters List. This is a cumulative list. So as I mentioned, from the Clean Water Act, it is a requirement that we submit this to the Environmental Protection Agency every 2 years, which is pretty frequent, and we're analyzing new data. It is cumulative, so every 2 years, any waters that had been listed are still going to be on that list unless new data has shown that they are meeting those water quality standards, and we're then removing them. So it's just one tool in our toolbox of really showing, you know, how well our surface water bodies, our lakes, our streams, our wetlands are supporting those uses and supporting those goals. There's lots of other ways you can kind of interpret and analyze that, and this is just one way. So as I mentioned, it is a cumulative list. Currently in this draft list, we have over 6,000 impairments over almost 3,000 different water bodies. And so it's important to notice that, you know, you can have a water body that's impaired for more than one use, perhaps from more than one pollutant. And we'll talk about those uses next. So here is a list, not comprehensive, of a few of these designated uses. And what do I mean by that? Well, you might hear it say designated uses, you might hear it say beneficial uses. You know, those are the uses or the goals of what we want to meet in our water bodies. And we have different standards for those different goals, right? Because the things that would keep critters like healthy fish and bugs are going to be a little different than what might keep humans protected and safe. So in this presentation and today, we're going to be focusing mostly on the uses of aquatic recreation for swimming and boating, you know, protecting us from bacterial illness, from too many nutrients that might cause an algae bloom, and also focusing on aquatic life. So those diversity of species of fish and bugs in our waterways that we share. Next slide. And then we also have some uses for aquatic consumption, right? And for protection of wild rice. And those uses we're going to be talking more deeply about in our statewide assessment meetings. So if you're interested in those, definitely tune in and we'll be talking more about those later. But today we're going to be focusing on aquatic recreation and aquatic life. Next. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the assessments we do that feed into the impaired waters list, right? So the Pollution Control Agency has two different approaches. One is the watershed approach. And so we have 80 different watersheds throughout the state of Minnesota. Starting in 2010, with the establishment of the Clean Water Fund, we were able to create this cyclical monitoring where every 2 years we are pulling out a few different watersheds and looking deeply in assessments at those, at all of the aquatic recreation and aquatic life impairments. And that means that within a 10-year cycle, we will have looked at the entire state in all of those watersheds. And we've done that once already. We've already gone through and assessed all of the state once before. So now we're partway through going in a second time. So in this list cycle, I've highlighted in red, those are the 8 watersheds that we have assessed in these last 2 years. So those are the ones that, this week's public meetings are focusing on. Yesterday, we talked about Mississippi River Twin Cities and Minnesota River Yellow Medicine. Today, we're going to be talking about Big Fork River watershed, Crow Wing River watershed, Boydesue-Mustinko watershed. Sorry, those are 2 different watersheds. They're very adjacent. So sometimes I lump them together in my head. So the second approach we have is every 2 years in conjunction with the list, we're looking for toxic pollutants, and that's what we might call our statewide assessment. And those are anything, like I mentioned, the aquatic consumption beneficial uses. We're looking at that for having low pollutants in fish tissue. Anything that might impact human health, we're looking at every 2 years. So we're not waiting for 10 years before we go back and look at that watershed again. So as I mentioned, we are going back through a second time to evaluate changes in these watersheds. And you're going to notice as we dive deeper into the watershed specific assessments here in a moment, that there are a lot of changes in some and not a lot of changes in others. And so, it's important to note that restoration work takes time and that keeping waters off the impaired waters list is just as important as delisting them or taking them off the list when we have new data to show improvements. All right, so now we're going to dive in a little more deeply into each of these 4 watersheds of the greater Minnesota area that we have assessed this year. So let's look at first the Big Fork River watershed. Now here, this map is showing that cumulative assessments. This is the impaired waters list information from the whole list. So when you're seeing the red of the things that are impaired, that's not showing the things that are just newly impaired this year. That may have been impaired from past lists. So there are a couple things to note in the Big Fork River watershed. We did have 3 different portions of streams that are listed so a TMDL has been written for them. And if you're not familiar with that, we're going to talk more at the end and explain what a TMDL is. So I might use some acronyms here that you're not familiar with. And this is for the folks that really are diving deep into some of this stuff. So some of these changes here, we've got, 3 different assessment units that have been moved to 4A for mercury and fish tissue, and 1 assessment unit that was determined to be insufficient information for dissolved oxygen that was removed from the list, and that's the Popple River. And then the only new impairment for this Big Fork River watershed is 1 for mercury and fish tissue. And that's what that arrow is pointing to right there for Shallow Pond is the name of that lake. And that already has a TMDL written for it. So that's already been moved to 4A. So that's all for the Big Fork. So let's dive into Crow Wing River. We do have one delisting for Farnham Creek for macroinvertebrate diversity, meaning that we are seeing the species that we would expect to see in that stream now, and we hadn't seen them before. And so that's what that arrow is pointing to there. And then we had, for new listings, one assessment unit for dissolved oxygen, that's new, 4 for fish biodiversity, and 2 for bacteria for that beneficial use of aquatic recreation. And those 2 for bacteria already have TMDLs written for them, so those are already in 4A. And then we have one WID that, or one assessment unit that we have decided and determined is due to natural conditions that it's impaired. So that was put into 4D. So next up, we're going to talk about the 2 watersheds of Boydesue and Mistinka. And I put these both on the same slide only because they are adjacent, in proximity. So on the north hand, you'll see the Boydesue. And there was one fish biodiversity assessment that was moved to 4C, meaning that there's not a pollutant that's causing the reason for why we're not seeing this fish species that we would expect to see there. And there are 13 new listings otherwise in that watershed. So 7 for macroinvertebrates or bug diversity, 3 for fish biodiversity, 1 for dissolved oxygen, and 2 for nutrients. And so the arrow that is pointing there on that Boydesue watershed is pointing towards that fish bioassessment that was determined to not be due to a pollutant, due to natural non-pollutant. Okay, so then let's talk about Mistinka. So that's the watershed outlined there towards the south. And there were 22 different changes or corrections that we made to the list. And those are that there's 18 different assessment units that have a TMDL that was written for them. And those were moved to 4A. And there are 2 WIDs that were determined to be 4C or non-pollutant. And that's what both of those arrows are pointing to. And so those were for both fish biodiversity and bug biodiversity. Then we have 3 assessment units that are going to be newly listed, or we've proposed to newly list them for dissolved oxygen, and 1 for nutrients in 12 Mile Creek. So we went through those pretty quickly, and we can dig in a little more of those at the end. We'll have some time for questions if you like. So I kept referencing TMDL, right? If you aren't familiar with that term is basically the pollutant budget for a water body. It is saying how much pollution can be in that water body while we can still meet our goals, our beneficial uses, our designated uses for aquatic recreation, for aquatic life. And the next steps after something is listed as impaired is that a TMDL is required to be written for it, so that we need to determine that pollution budget. And those TMDLs will then feed into those watershed restoration and protection strategies, or the RAPs. And like I mentioned, we've already gone through and assessed the entire state's watersheds once already. And similarly, we already have protection strategies, or RAPs, that have already been written for all of these watersheds. So as we're going through the second time and doing more assessments and evaluating more new data that we have, we'll be doing updates on those RAPs. So over on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see listed out our expected timelines of when those are going to be updated. And we have some project managers on the line if you have any specific questions on those at the end. All right, so there's one more piece that I would like to talk about before we get deep in the weeds of explaining kind of how to comment on this list. And that is our assessment guidance manual. And our manual is in conjunction with the impaired waters list, updated every 2 years. You know, our impaired waters list being that beautifully designed spreadsheet that we all know and love. And the guidance manual being that document that details out how we do our assessments. What are the minimum data requirements? How do we determine if we have enough data to show that something's impaired or not? That's all outlined there. And there's been some formatting changes this time around. So hopefully it is a lot easier for you to search and find the information you're looking for in the guidance manual. And then also new this year, we have Appendix H, which are the waters used for production of wild rice. So that is a list of what the Pollution Control Agency is designating as the beneficial use for producing wild rice. And so we'll be accepting public comments on that as well. So right now we have this draft impaired waters list, right? So it is open for public comment until January 12th. After that, we'll be looking at all of those comments, responding to comments, and making any changes to the impaired waters list as appropriate. And then our federal deadline is April 1st. So we need to submit to the Environmental Protection Agency our final by April 1st. That'll give them then 30 days to approve it or disapprove pieces of it before it becomes final. And so after that, when the EPA approves it as final is when it will replace our 2022 impaired waters list, which is still on our website right now for you to check out and look at. Also in this draft 2024 list, if you click way over on the tabs, you can see the 22 list in that same spreadsheet. So right now we're accepting comments until January 12th. Like I mentioned, you can comment on the list itself, that big extensive spreadsheet. Also, there's a tab for the statewide mercury TMDL, and we're accepting comments on that as well. And then thirdly, the assessment guidance manual. Particularly, we're looking at any comments you have on Appendix H of waters used for production of wild rice. So are there, pieces of data that you might have that you would expect to see your water body on the impaired waters list? Is there something that you expect you should be delisted? We want to hear about that. And we have a new tool this year that's making it easier than ever to comment on the draft list. At least I hope it is very easy for you. It is for me, where you can go ahead and go to the Minnesota Impaired Waters List webpage. You just scroll down and click Comment Now. It'll pop up a different browser, and you can type your comment straight in that text box. You can link a letter, you can link GPS points, you can link data spreadsheets, you can link photographs. So any supporting evidence you have that'll bulk up your comment and help us to see what it is that you think that we're missing. Next slide. And then I just wanted to point out to you that there is this little button down at the bottom where you can click View Comments. So once you submit your comment, you can go there and confirm that it was submitted. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, this is the second of our regional meetings. We have one more regional meeting for the Southeast watersheds coming up on Thursday. And there's 2 upcoming statewide meetings. So those are the ones we're going to focus on those statewide assessments, and we'll have some experts on the line to help answer more questions about those. Just wanted to point out to you that they both have the same content. So if you're interested in those, you don't have to attend both. Just pick one to attend there. Okay, so that's kind of a general overview, what's new this list, what's changing this list. Wanted to leave you with a few takeaways before we dive into some questions. You know, Minnesota really does monitor more often and in more places than the states around us. So it's good to note that when we have this big bulky list, we are going out and we are looking for a lot more pollutants than any of the states around us. When we're finding that information, we're putting it on the impaired waters list. So we have a pretty extensive knowledge of what's going on in our water bodies. We're also seeing some improvements on nutrients in lakes. You know, we are delisting 27 different assessment units or sections of streams, sections of lakes, whole lakes this year. So some good improvements on nutrients in lakes thanks to that really bulky data set. And then it's also important to note that it takes time for restoration to occur and to get delisted, right? So it takes time for that on the ground project to happen. It takes time to see those effects in the waterways. It takes time to gather all of that data in order to get delisted. So as I mentioned before, when you're seeing impairment numbers that are new, whether they are expected in impairment numbers or not, it's just as important to be keeping waters off the list as it is to get them delisted. So both are important. Those are my couple takeaways for you. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. Yep. And dive into some questions now. This is a photo of Middle Lake in Kandiyohi County. This is one of our lakes that's delisted this year for nutrients, thanks to some partnership with the DNR on carp removal. And there's a good feature story on our website if you're interested in going and checking that out and reading about that. So thank you very much for letting me give my presentation, and we can go ahead and get into some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Leya. We can go ahead and, yeah, if you have a question, just raise your hand with the reaction button at the bottom and we'll call on you.
Got some shy folks on the line. I know you have questions.
And as a reminder to folks to be sure to check out our statewide meetings happening on Friday and Tuesday, right, Leya?
Correct.
Yes, and then Thursday is the Southeast region. But yeah, we definitely encourage everyone to come to those as well. Different presentation, more information on some of those statewide issues like PFOS. So definitely come check that out. And if you have any questions too that come to mind afterwards, feel free to send an email to that impaired.waters.mpca email at the bottom. It goes right to Leya. She'll get you connected to the right people.
Say, could I ask a question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I didn't see a chat feature or anything. I wonder if you could tell us how our state agencies use the list to figure out where to focus our efforts. I'm just noticing a lot of public comments in the written ones that have been submitted already, and I think that might answer it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, you know, as I mentioned, once something gets listed as impaired, then there's that requirement to develop a TMDL for it, to develop a pollution budget for it. And that really helps direct and focus where there needs to have perhaps permitting being done, perhaps restoration work being done. And so that TMDL really helps feed into those RAPs, those watershed protection strategies. And so once we have those RAPs in place, working with close partnership with other local watershed managers and agencies as well. Those are all important partners in our RAPs. That's when some on-the-ground work happens in order to develop an action plan and really work on some efforts there. Does that kind of answer your question, Paul?
I think you covered.
Great. And I'm seeing a lot of names on the line that I am familiar with, so perhaps you've already gotten some of your question answered through your project manager. If you're ever not sure who you should talk to about questions, go ahead and send them to me, and I can help get you connected with whoever you need to talk to.
Looks like we have a thumbs up from Renee Kieser. Do you want to go ahead and ask a question?
No, I'm good at this time. Thank you.
Sounds good. You're just agreeing with Leia. Awesome. Awesome. We'll do a last call, I think, here. Any last questions?
I did miss the beginning part of the presentation. Is this different from the one that you presented yesterday, Leia?
So yeah, the beginning part is a lot the same. So you didn't miss anything there. As long as you saw some of those in-depth about the watersheds, we went through the 4 watersheds that we looked at in Central Region. So Boy de Sioux, Mustinka, Big Fork, and Crow Wing. So those are the pieces that are different.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Final call for any questions. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We will save this recording and post it on our YouTube afterwards if you'd like to refer back to it. Otherwise, we look forward to hearing from you, receiving your comments, and maybe seeing you at one of our next public meetings. So thanks all.